Hello again. As I might have mentioned before, I have something of a reputation when it comes to murder. Not for committing it, I hasten to add, but about the history of the practice in Britain. In the description to this video, I give links to a few books which I've written on the subject. Many years ago, I used to have my own column in True Detective magazine, and I am still from time to time engaged by television and film companies as a consultant on executions and murder in 19th and 20th century Britain. I mention this because it provides a little background to the views which I've expressed on this channel, that the nature of homicide in this country is changing, and indeed has changed in recent decades. I attribute this change almost exclusively to immigration. Perhaps I ought to explain why I say this. This is one of my books on murder. It contains details of every execution carried out during the First World War in this country, and the murders which led to the gallows. I want to read out a couple of paragraphs which should make what I'm saying a little clearer. There are fads and fashions in murder, just as there are in other fields of human endeavour, such as architecture and music. Today, the commonest means used in this country to cut short the life of another person is stabbing with a sharp implement. Around 40% of British homicides are carried out in this way. A century ago, rather than jabbing with something pointed, taste ran more to slashing and hacking, invariably at the throat or neck of the prospective victim. A third of the murderers hanged between the outbreak of war in the summer of 1914 and the signing of the armistice in 1918 committed their crimes by using this method. The weapon wielded was, in almost every such case, an open razor. Not for nothing was the open or straight razor known colloquially as the cutthroat razor. Murder is usually a spur-of-the-moment act being committed with whatever weapon lays closest at hand. In America, where privately owned firearms are alarmingly common, 2/3 of homicides involve the use of guns. In Britain 100 years ago, the most deadly instrument readily available in the average home was the razor. I wonder if everybody gets the point here. Murders have always been committed in Britain, although the actual rate has fluctuated. The way that murder is committed, though, has changed over the years. 100 years ago, cutting a victim's throat was common. Now it's almost unheard of. Murders were nearly always carried out inside buildings, and almost always, but not of course invariably, the victim was known to the killer. Just as the nature of murder can change over the years in one country, so too it can vary from country to country, continent to continent. In the United States, firearms are used far more in murders than they are in this country because of their ready availability. What this means is that sometimes people from countries with a different tradition when it comes to murder will move to another country and take with them their predilection for their own national methods of dealing out death. We see this in Sweden, of course, when Albanians moved to the country in large numbers in the 1990s. For these people, killing by means of guns and explosives was more common than other methods, and so even in Scandinavia they maintained their traditions, thus making Sweden the gun crime capital of Europe today. Let me pause at this moment and ask if anybody thinks that any of this sounds racist or xenophobic. I do not say that the British tradition today of stabbing with sharp objects is better than the Albanian one of using firearms, merely that they are different. Both are undesirable. Of course, these are not absolutes, they're trends. There's certainly been murders carried out in the street in this country. The last woman to be hanged in this country, Ruth Ellis, not only committed her murder in the street, she used a gun as well. These sorts of things are exceptions, though, and generally speaking, we can expect to see British homicides conform to a different pattern to those in the Central African Republic, Tibet, or Canada. Of course, any method of murder can crop up in any country, and guns or knives are not confined to either one geographical location or historical period. We are always thinking about percentages and probabilities. So it is that we can hazard a guess from the nature of violent or deadly assaults about the ethnicity or nationality of the person carrying out the crime. This is not infallible, mind, but very often it will be correct. Because most white British people kill people they know indoors with a sharp implement, well, it sounds a bit like Cluedo, doesn't it? In the house with the sharp implement. Anyway, because we know this, if we hear of somebody killing a stranger out of doors by cutting the throat rather than stabbing, it's a fair guess that this is somebody whose background and traditions in violence are from a different country. So it was that when a little girl in the park with her mother had her throat cut by a stranger a couple of years ago, it was a fair guess that the culprit was not from this country. So it proved. Eltiona Skana was Albanian. I give a link to the case in the description to this video. Stabbing sprees in the street, where a person charges around stabbing strangers at random for no obvious reason, are almost exclusively carried out by either Muslim fanatics or black men with mental health problems. There have been quite a few such attacks in this country in the last couple of decades, and I cannot offhand think of a case where the perpetrator was a white British non-Muslim. So it was that when a few days ago I heard that 4 people had been stabbed in the course of such a spree in Manchester, I naturally assumed that the police would be hunting for an African or a Caribbean. The thumbnail to this video shows a picture of the person whom the police would like to interview in connection with the attacks. I'm wholly at a loss to know why anybody would regard any of this as racist or xenophobic. I'm talking about how things stand in the real world, and I'm not of course suggesting that all Albanians are gun-toting gangsters, any more than I'm saying that Jamaicans are in the habit of going around on stabbing sprees. I'm talking of observable trends and tendencies. This video is partly in response to a weird guy whose channel some of you might have seen yesterday. I've been trying in vain to explain some of this to him in comments, but this video seems an easier way of doing so. I'm on top of this kind of thing relating to homicide because it's part of my living, writing books about murder and executions and advising other people on the subject. So it is something that I've kept an eye on for, well, longer than I care to remember, really.